Hello, my name is Tommy Darwin, and today we're going to talk about how to talk about yourself. Now, that may seem like a funny topic, but actually, when it comes to making connections and networking, being able to talk about yourself can be one of the hardest but most important things to do. Very often, it's easy to feel like you're being annoying, or I don't really like to talk about myself, or how do I do this? So, purpose of this session is to give you some ideas about how to do that. Now, in general, there are two different ways that people will do this. One way is just to kind of tell their resume, tell their credentials, tell their job history, their work history, kind of a list. And while that can be important, it's not nearly as compelling as what we want to talk about today, and that is how to tell stories about yourself, right? That's a really excellent way to connect with people and help give them a way to understand who you are and where you're going. So first, let's talk about maybe the most basic kind of story that you want to tell about yourself. And the first part of that is just tell a story about something that you're pursuing, something that you're about, something that's important to you. There's a tendency to tell, well, here, I'm looking for a job, or I'm trying to find this, or I need help. That may be true, but much better to say, but despite that, here's what I'm doing. Here's where I'm going. Here's what's important to me and where I'm going. Another important aspect of that story can be say, and here are the things that I've overcome to get here. If you think about all the really good stories, think about movies that you like or novels or stories that you've read, one thing they very often have in common is that the hero, in this case you, is overcoming things. So if you can think about that, and that becomes a very interesting part of your story, make it easy for people to remember. Another important thing is this part of what you're about and what you're doing. That's going to make a difference for people. So being able to share that and not being shy about, look, at whatever level, I'm a great cook. This makes my family happy. I've done these things in my jobs, and here's what that difference. That's really going to be very important. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, be sure you get their stories. Say, now, what is your story? Or you can start there. You can say to them, tell me what your story is, and that's a good way to connect. The reason for that is because stories are kind of the most basic way that humans connect with each other. We share a lot of information. We do many, especially in this day and age, many different ways that we share information and do things. But at the end of the day, the most important way is we still tell stories. If you think about when you introduce yourself to somebody or when somebody introduces themselves, the most basic way, if you listen, is that they're kind of telling a little short story about themselves and where they've been and where they're going. That's a very human thing to do. And because of that, stories help us make sense, right? This is what's going on. Well, how did I get here? Where do I think I'm going? And if you can begin to talk about that, it will help you make sense and help you be able to recognize and in a lot of ways even create possibilities or opportunities. So let's talk a little bit more then about what we'll call being strategic, okay? In other words, being intentional or having a purpose or being smart about how you're using your stories. One way you can do that is just to try out different versions of yourself. Okay, I'm thinking I want to go into a certain field or I want to try something different. Let me start telling a story about myself where I'm kind of doing that and see what kind of reactions I get, how I feel. Does it fit for me? Another way to think about another type of story you can do is try somebody else's story. If you see people that are doing things that you want to be or that you want to try, start talking as if you were doing that as you were beginning to take those steps. A last type of story you can use along these lines is the story that's about what you aspire to, something that's more hopeful or something that's appealing. This can be about you. This can be about people that you care about. And these are very important because these stories will often be the ones that will keep you moving as you're working through different challenges and overcoming things. And that's because the most powerful story, if we think about what your story can be, the most powerful story really is the story of overcoming something to achieve something that's important to you, something that really matters to you. And little things. It doesn't have to be major things all the time. In fact, a lot of stories are overcoming little things to really get to the big thing that you're trying to do. And being able to talk about, too, how you became different, how you've grown, how you've been transformed, the little things that you've learned that maybe have made you wiser or stronger or even more humble in a lot of cases. So being able to tell those stories as well. We also mentioned that it is as important to get the stories of others. Okay, so one of the things that you want to get good at doing as you're telling your stories to people is asking them for their stories. Now, a lot of people will just tell you anyway. That's good. You definitely want to be able to do that. But if they're not, ask them. Because more than resources, more than cash or handouts or anything that people want, more than anything, people want to be heard and they want to be respected. We all do. You do. So if you extend that and ask people, that's why oftentimes a great way to do it is to ask them what their story is. The good thing too about being the second person to tell your story sometimes is that it will show you how you can craft your story to connect with them and really build the connection. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're really trying to do, is make connections between ourselves and other people. So learning how to tell other people's stories will help you listen to hear the details. In fact, one of the ways you can do this is when somebody's telling you their story, instead of thinking about what you're going to say next, listen to it as if you are now going to have to tell their story to somebody else. One way you can do this is like in a group like this. If you are talking to people and practice introducing somebody to somebody new and telling their story, having heard it. It's a really good way to practice listening. And also, people like to hear how you kind of put your spin on their story. So finally, let's talk about the different types of stories that you may want to use. A repertoire of stories, kind of if you're a story performer. What are some of the different things? One of the most basic stories to get good at is family stories. Everybody has family stories, right? We all have family stories. Good stories, bad stories, challenging stories, funny stories. So being able to tell those and getting those, that's a great way to connect. Even in the context of looking for a job or trying to make professional connections, it brings the human part back into it and builds important pieces because we all have families. Second, stories, as we've mentioned a lot, of struggle and overcoming. Those are very compelling. We all have them, even little ones. How do we do that? What is that? How do we get to where we are? Because that helps us know how we're going to get to where we want to be. Stories that are inspiring. What are the stories that give you hope? What are the stories that motivate you? And again, they can be from your personal life. They don't have to be big, but the things that really keep you moving. This is an important thing to ask yourself. Or at the same time, maybe the stories that are like, ooh, I want to be careful. I don't want to go there, right? These are the stories, for example, that can show up in gossip. And I'm not saying we want to gossip, but being able to share those stories, be careful, or hear the things that somebody else did that we can learn from. Stories always, the moral of the story, okay? Telling those stories. And then lastly, and very important, tell the stories that are real. Tell stories about real people. Tell stories about what's going on right now, because those can be the most helpful stories to people who are trying to work through things and figure things out. So thank you very much for your time and attention.